we're going to try this one. Okay, sitting on the dash of the truck, obviously, and I've discovered as long as I got it plugged into the stereo amplifies the sound of just a hair, so it's a little bit better. We also have the background of the truck running. The downside of that is I got no airflow, and I'm sitting here with the window partially open next to the street. We are in what's called Dogtown, Des Moines, Iowa. This is near Drake off of University. There's a small chain of restaurants and other other shops and stuff in this little block here. Two of which I have as customers. One's called Mars Cafe. I do that in the evenings every 3 months. The other one is called Gersha, and I do them at 8 a.m. on a Monday. At least the idea is once a month. We're lucky if we get once a month. Anyway, I've been looking through this Barons of Braunstein, and it's pronounced Braunstein. That's from the half dozen videos I've watched over the last 2 days on the subject. And this was a game concept that predated D&D, Gygax's Dungeons and Dragons, by David Wesley. Now the booklet itself is produced by James and Robin George, and I'm not sure what the connection is between them and David Wesley, but it says in here, some part in here where it talks about that. And from everything I've heard about the Braunstein formula or process, a lot of what people are doing with Braunstein is how Wesley himself prefers to play this. And I understand the man's still alive and does several conventions each year where you can actually sit down with him, listen to him talk about the process, everything that led up to this, why he did it, why he thought it was a failure at first, but his players did not, and then go through how he plays it. And there's plenty of videos on that. If I think about it, I will tag a couple of them in the comment section for y'all to go look at. But so it talks in the introduction here, is well known that role-playing hobby sprang from war games sometime in the early 70s. Less acknowledges the role of the transitional Braunstein game to this evolution, being a missing link between different modes of play. And it goes on, it says, one night back in the day, Neapolitic war gamer David Wesley tried something a little different. Instead of having each person command an army, he set things between battles in the town of Braunstein, with the players acting the part of important townsfolk, each having an agenda and personal goals within the game setting. Thus, a new hobby was born. So I will be specific. As we go through the book, and you can see in here, we've got characters and combat and basic rules. This is rules light at the utmost. This is the very early concept. When I was talk about working on my own would-be game, Interstellar Frontiers, the very first conceptual game that I came out with was not too much unlike this. Very, very crude, very, very basic. The idea was I knew what I wanted to do, and I wanted to have consistent set of rules in which to continue doing the same thing and not just keep ad-libbing as I went. So I began writing down, well, how would I do this? What should I do if this happens? How do we, deal with this? And then I got a couple other people to play test it, and then they enjoyed it a lot. I didn't think it was all that great, but they kept asking questions. Well, what do we do here? How do we do this? This developed and developed and developed into the current version, which I'm slowly poking away at, trying to get a digital version of so I can put it out there, just to get it out there. If I make a little money off of it, I'd be grateful, but mostly it's just for me to get it out there for people to see. So we talk about dice, using 6-sided dice in this system. Miniatures are optional, which if you understand that the wargaming of the old school, 1960s and before, because it goes back into the 1700s, 1600s wargaming does, and there's a long old school stuff. So the basic Braunstein or Wesley studied a book called Strategos, which was written for the U.S. military, for the U.S. Army in the 1800s as a war game, or to teach war gaming to officers and so on and so forth. And there goes another truck. that was based off of a system, a game that was created for the Prussian army that they credited because for all normal standards, the Napoleon's army should have crushed the Prussians at a certain battle or certain situation but the Prussians managed to pull off a win in part because they had been playing war games against every conceivable Neapolitan French army action that they could come up with for decades, and it did pay off. So this was a transition of things that came out of this, that led to this, that led to this. It's somewhat how Gygax, his original war game was based off of something called chainmail. Somewhere in the channel I did a video on it, right? So we talk about dice, miniatures, getting started. And one of the things that this introduced before Gygax was the concept of a judge. Right? Or so you could call it a dungeon master, game master, storyteller. The acronym doesn't make a difference. But at the end of the day, they came up with a supposedly neutral party who would take on the role of creating the scenario that you would then find yourself in, and then would act as the arbitrator between two players that have an issue or a dispute, and also to fill in the role for any NPC characters that were needed as needed, right? So then we talk about things like traits, literacy, and illiteracy actually makes a difference. So instead of hit points, you have luck. And if you're an illiterate person, you actually have 2 extra points of luck versus being literate. So the difference between being a well-read person and an ignorant, a poorly educated person would be 2 extra points of luck. And that was to represent the extra stuff you had to go through to just navigate through your normal day in life, right? So. And ideally, if you were reduced to 0 luck, it doesn't mean you're dead necessarily. It just means you're very ineffectual, right? And if you had armor and shields, some of that can negate some of that at the cost of the armor and shields, etc., etc. So literacy, social class plays a role in it. Lady Luck. All characters begin the chronicle with 10 points of luck, plus 2 if they happen to be illiterate, representing the skill and strength necessary to survive difficult situations. Players can spend 1 luck performing any one of the following as judge permits, and it goes down through a very short list. We get into a little bit of background on your character, how the use of armor and shields, weapons, and the difference between bows, one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons. Very specific. In order to have a shield, you had to have a one-handed weapon. You cannot use a bow or use a two-handed weapon with a shield. It wasn't allowed. Then you have equipment and load. So you see the very basic concepts of the framework for what became the role-playing games that we all know and love today. We get into some costs, and then we got a sample character. The following sample characters provided as an example, demonstrating what a finished hero might look like. Name, Might. Sex, female. Literacy, illiterate, plus 2 luck. So luck is 12. Social class, commoner. Background, Might is a young street urchin with no knowledge of her birth name. Although willing to steal, she is protective of the weak and helpless. Equipment, backpack, bedroll, knife, picks and tools, rations. Experience, 0. Treasure, 12 silver pieces. So as for encumbrance, you were allowed 20 items. It wasn't about how much weight, it was based on the amount of items you have total. And I don't know if that included gold or not. I haven't dug that deep into it. So then we get to part 2 or chapter 2, the game. So doing things, tasks, success is simple, no need to check. Ordinary, walking or talking, easy, 7 or better. Elementary, little interference. Moderate is 9 or better, based on the 2d6 rolls. Harder and distraction presence. Difficult, 12 plus. And so there's a few modifiers based on your luck and other stuff. Knowledge, strength, acts of stealth, pushing your luck. So pushing your luck, a literate character can add +1 to reciting facts. Otherwise, players can spend luck adding +1 to any die roll. They can roll first to decide whether or not to do this. Note that running out of luck in this way does not result in death unless the character later enters combat. So, order of action, the melee, movement, resolution, death and healing, using armor, natural hazards, poison, mechanical traps. Most of this covers maybe a paragraph, bear traps, poison needles, projectiles, swinging blades, experience. Chapter 3, The Chronicle. Barons of Braunstein is a medieval setting, although the judge has considerable freedom when choosing a period to chronicle in, noting that most should derive from the following: period, Dark Ages, period, Middle Ages, including Viking era, blah, blah. Note that while some may disagree with the designation Dark Age as a period, it remains useful, including, among other things, the Viking Age, when Christianity and northern paganism coexisted. Right, so on. So when and where, language, and then gets on to some stuff about languages spoken, and then religions here as well, dungeon forays, town adventures, wilderness forays, mapping the game, non-players, all the basics for everything that you would need to run a very bare bones role-playing game pre-Dungeons and Dragons. Always nice to know just where the roots came from and how they played a role. It's my understanding that Gygax played this a few times with Wesley, so he got some ideas from Wesley. I'm just saying. So wealth and riches, antiquity, beasts of burden, historical battles, advanced rules, whole extra whole extra page on things like shield walls and heavy armor, etc., etc. All right, so historical battles, raids, reconnaissance, skirmishes, war horses, siege weapons, storming the walls. The following is a true siege. It gets into a little detail on that. Castle defenses, so on and so forth. Historical timeline, etc. So it's very, very basic, bare bones. Now, that all said, Mr. Wesley goes to these conventions, and you'll see him in those videos. You'll see good examples, and a lot of people have talked about their experiences in it. And so their idea is that he gives you, basically you get handed a character from you pick a role that you would like to play, or he offers he offers up who would like to play this character, who would like to play this role, who would like to play this role, until he runs out of them, right? And so usually then it becomes this kind of a LARP, a live action role play, reminiscent of diplomacy. Now, if you've never played the actual game of diplomacy is a war game. It actually has pieces on a map, on a board that you move around, but the more important, most of the effort behind the diplomacy action is you making deals and backstabbing the other players. So in this case, the whole part of the LARP at the conventions he runs, very little of what's in the book gets done. You actually see no combat. It's all about negotiating, basically, and trying to figure out who's who, right? A very advanced version of Clue. The closest system I can say that I've ever participated in that's similar to this would be Magic the Gathering, the LARP, when you do it at conventions. And I've done it twice at a convention, and it's interesting. Early in my gig, there was a couple years during the 90s that I was into a group that did do LARPing, so we did do LARPing. Somewhere out in my garage, I still have a foam sword and a shield. Well, I think the shield I threw away, but I still have the sword up in the loft of the garage that I kept for I don't know, because I'm weird, right? Anyway, the idea behind this thing sets some pretty interesting goals. So when I listened to the gal Harmony Ginger and her experience, and when she was talking about running a Braunstein, I was a bit puzzled by what she meant by that, because like I said, I've seen this for years. Back in the day, this was there was a rack at Ivor's Game Store when I was younger, and it had a lot of this really old stuff in it. It's in part where I got my Judges Guild collection from. Now, these other books were up there, and I know I glanced at them once or twice, but they were so, I don't know, crude compared to the red box set of Dungeons and Dragons and the other material like Gamma World that was coming out, that I passed on them. And then over the years, they sat there and they dwindled, but there was one or two still in the store for probably up until the early 90s when Ivor went out of business. Well, he retired is what he did. And whatever happened to him after that, I don't know. But I passed up buying on them, and I kind of wish I hadn't, because of the collection reason, if nothing else. Because I'm always interested in the hobby and behind the scenes of the hobby, the mechanics of why we play, and how, not necessarily how we play, but how did we get here from there. So when I heard Miss Ginger talking about her Braunstein session, and the way she was dealing with it was she basically got her players together and got them to help cooperate to create the world that they were going to play in, starting with the gods. And you can look at her video and she'll tell you how she did that. And so her idea of a Braunstein is not really as accurate as I thought it might be. And I'm not that I'm disappointed by it, because like I said, whenever it comes to gaming, everything is what you want it to be. You can choose to do anything any way you want to do your game your way, and that's the beautiful thing about most role-playing games. The GMs, on the other hand, the dungeon masters or whatever, the storytellers, each you do your own, right? Each has their own style and preferences, and some are very analytical and very by the book, and some are very fluid. Like I said, I recently started a play-by-post on a website that I found that's kind of really crude compared to D&D Beyond, which is sad in some ways. But I just started the story. I created an NPC character. I just started posting what the character was doing in my own personal way of doing things, and now I got a player who's wanting to play, and their entry was pretty good, and we'll go from there. And my goal is not to. I opened the sandbox for other people, and I want to play too, and I will act in the best way as I feel I can, and I feel to react to what they do. And so that said, I'm not so sure that this is for anybody or for everybody. I mean, if you're really big into LARPing and stuff, you already understand the basic rules. And I'll bet you dime to a dollar that a lot of basic LARP rules came out of the concept, not so much of the game, its material itself, but how Mr. Wesley roleplay or live action plays this thing at conventions. I'm sure enough people have experienced it, seen it, because he's been doing it for decades, that it's all started to kind of click together, right? I'm kind of liking this portable. I still got to get me a case for it, and I know the sound's not as good as it could be. Like I said, I've got another 40 minutes before 8 o'clock. I took a nap yesterday afternoon, all right, about a 3-hour nap. Got up around 4 o'clock. Went to work at 8 o'clock. Here it is going on 8 o'clock. And hopefully by the time I'll get done here, get the truck back to the shop, turn the paperwork in, and get home, it'll be going on 9 a.m. Right? So that'll be a 13-hour overnight day. I have the rest of the day off, technically, but that's because I'll be home in bed sleeping for a good part of it anyway. It just makes for a longer day. This is a Braunstein system. I don't know, right? But what I do know is I can see the connectivity both to the traditional role-playing game and the war games that have came since and that existed before. I can also understand the connection to live-action role-playing and this concept of player interaction. And this is something that, once again, is not new, been around a long time. It depends on the GM. Now, I personally started getting more and more into this open sandbox, open directional idea for the players, as well as myself as playing the GM, probably 15 years ago or so. And the idea being is that you just kind of have to put out enough threads, enough ideas of possibilities, and let the players go where they go. And that's in part in homage to a lot of the video games that we see today. And part of my experience for turning that way had to do with all the years of me playing the massive multiplayer online games, where you go into these text-based games. I played Gemstone 3 for a long time, another game called Modus Operandi for a long time. And you would go in and you basically went off and did what you did, and you get together with some friends, you went out as a group, you went out by yourself. There were puzzles, there were challenges, things like this, but you decided where you wanted to go and how you wanted to react. The catch was, how do you negotiate that and navigate that as a GM, right? And so there's some challenges. Where one of the things that I started doing was, I started thinking, don't think too much ahead at the beginning. Let the world develop. So I set down a basic framework. I know where the game's at. So like in this play-by post, it's set using basic or first edition Shadowrun, and I was very clear with in my intro that that's what I'm using, and I'm not going to brook any argument about it because it's what I have, and that it would be set in the Seattle Metroplex, and from there we would go forward. It depends on the characters and the players and how the story develops. Over time, characters and non-player characters can take you in places that you didn't envision yourself. It also saves the GM a hell of a lot of work from trying to guess where they're going to go and what they're going to do, and or railroading them in a subtle or an overtly obvious way by saying, this is what you're going to do, this is where you got to go. And so by throwing down, I don't know, 4 or 5 possibilities in the scenarios, and then you write these down. You just write a small intro. All right, so the character is in a posh, flashy bar. There's a you know, a redhead flirting with a salaryman, and he's from Fujita, and next to him he bumps into obviously a over-muscled security guard off duty, perhaps. He drops his cred stick, it rolls off onto the table. Nearby in another table is an infamous lady Nightshade or something like that, who is a known fixer with, you know, a questionable reputation. And then a couple other instances or other things that are of interest in the bar, just to see what the character wants to do and where they want to go with it. And then you roll with that, but you track that stuff too. You write this stuff down in the notebook, and I date the date, so, or the scenario, the scene number, and then so, because if we come down to this situation, some of this stuff can compound and manipulate and change. So we may once again run into some of these NPC characters in other ways, and having an idea when they were introduced and what situation they were introduced in allows me to see if there's something that can segue into something funner or bigger, or can it be applied to the current situation that the runners are in. So it's just a matter of how you want a perspective and how you want to look at it. I recommend, if you can find a copy of this, I found it pretty easily. This is available for a PDF download, obviously, and if you're interested, are interested in the history of the hobby, I would get a copy of this just so you can read through it yourself. As a matter of fact, just for fun, you might sit down with some friends and run a game or two with it. Keep in mind, though, if you watch the videos of Mr. Wesley actually running this thing at some conventions, how he's running it doesn't compare to the actual game mechanics and the rules that are listed, which is interesting in itself. It just also shows that not everything has to be by the book or as written. Anyway, I'm Rick. I'm outside of Gersha, probably another half hour. Parked over here across the street because it's a narrow alley. A lot of people roll up and down the alley, and when I get down there, I'm going to block the alley, and inevitably pisses somebody off. It's just one of those, what do you do? All right, so about 10 minutes to 8 or closer, a little closer than that, I'll row over there and I'll start pulling the hoses and stuff off, get everything staged up. Hopefully he shows up on time. If it's not him, it's one of his employees. The man also owns a little grocery store up here, a block and a half up here, and so usually it's one or the other. This place is closed on Mondays, which is why he wants to get it done. It smells, so we don't want to smell up the place, right? So hopefully the sound worked on this and the video came through. It seems to be still recording. The downside, of course, is I can't put any headers or front end on it and stuff. Not with this, not here present. I don't know if that matters or not, but it just gives me one more option for doing some videos for the channel. Good or bad, right? However you want to look at it. Anyway, next time, y'all have a great day.